In this episode, I am going to be reviewing Panic in the Streets, the film noir from 1950. This was directed by Elia Kazan and it starred Richard Widmark, Barbara Bel Geddes, Paul Douglas, Zero Mostel, and Jack Palance. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a podcast exploring movies from all over the world and talking about how those stories were told on film. Today is another film noir, a different kind of film noir, and it very much relates to what have all been experiencing in the last 2 years with the COVID-19 pandemic that has affected the entire world. This is the exactly same thing that happens in this story, which is essentially about trying not to have this plague spread. Off the top, we see someone who was illegally entered into a country get killed by Jack Palance. He's involved with some crime. He won a poker game or some kind of a card game that Jack Palance, of course, as a gangster, did not want to lose his money. Because the man is feeling unwell, he wants to leave without giving them a chance for them to win their money back. And so they shoot him. And the coroner is basically investigating what happens and notices this strange bacteria on his body. And they call the doctor in, Richard Widmark, who's really interesting character because he's someone who's underpaid and overworked. And he's works for the government in the public service department as a doctor. And they call him in. He sees that it's some kind of pneumonic plague. And so anyone who has to who came in contact with the dead body has to get vaccinated. And we see even in the film people not wanting to take the vaccine or not trusting doctors. Very much relates to what a number of people have felt in the last couple of years, people who don't want to take the COVID-19 vaccine. So we're seeing that not trusting government is a part of this film, not trusting doctors. One of the most interesting characters was Paul Douglas because, Richard Widmark wants to do everything to find these criminals who killed him because he knows that they must be carrying this disease and it will spread and kill people within 4 or 5 days. And so they have to find them, and even the government, even the government officials, the police don't want to do it, don't believe the doctor. They're extremely cynical, particularly Paul Douglas. And luckily the mayor of this takes place in New Orleans. He says, okay, let's do everything we can to find these criminals so it doesn't spread. But because the police were so cynical about it, Richard Widmark basically becomes a detective and does everything he can to work with the police. And the relationship between Richard Widmark and Paul Douglas's character is really interesting because you find out that the reason Paul Douglas doesn't believe him is because of his own experience from a doctor misdiagnosing his wife, and then his wife died as a result. And every time they find some kind of a lead, he makes some kind of smart aleck remark about it, like, oh, yes, lots of hope now, or something along those lines. So he was increasingly annoying me because he has this job to do, and he's just kind of doing the bare minimum in order to get it done, which is infuriating Richard Widmark, who is the only person who believes that, if these criminals get out of the city, it's going to spread throughout the whole country. And another reason why they didn't want to get it out to the public is that they knew that if it was in the press, that those criminals would run and then it's going to be in another city and spread throughout the country. So they wanted to contain it and locate these people so that they can, again, prevent it from spreading. So they have this huge task on their hands to find these two guys, and this is Jack Palance and Zero Mostel. Now, what's interesting about them and their relationship was also one of fear. And Zero Mostel, he brought a humor to it because he's so afraid of Jack Palance. And, Jack Palance is a scary guy, as we all know, and a number of his performances. And he sees that the police are trying to track down who killed this guy so much. Like they're questioning anyone anywhere about it. They even bring in Zero Mostel and they're ruthless in trying to find out who did it. So Jack Palance can't understand why they would be doing that with someone who wasn't even from his point of view, he was not someone that usually the police wouldn't go to the stakes to find. So for him, it was, well, that he must have been carrying something. So now Jack Palance and Zero Mostel are trying to find the other guy who brought him in, who was at the card game, to see what happened. They don't know anything about this plague because it's not out in the public. It's a very exciting film, and every single scene is high stake because, you know, Richard Widmark and the police are trying to save the city and the country. It's heavy on plot. And but the characterizations are pretty interesting because Richard Widmark, you discover later on, he has these wonderful scenes with his wife, played by Barbara Bel Geddes, and she really understands him. And the reason he's even before this, he's often grumpy. He's temperamental, and a lot of it is because he feels that can't do enough for the family. He's underpaid, and he feels as though he isn't important. It's interesting because that's something that Paul Douglas thinks of him before. He even says to Paul Douglas, well, why do you think I would go to this length to make sure that this disease doesn't spread? I mean, why would I do this if I'm not absolutely sure that we have to find these guys? And even Paul Douglas says, well, you want to feel important, which is not totally true. I think it's partly true that maybe he feels that he'll be a hero if he finds this out, but I don't think he's certainly not making it up just to have some kind of fame in the city or become some kind of hero or get some press. But I think there is an aspect to his character that he does want to feel important because he feels as though he isn't important. He feels he hasn't done anything that is worthwhile. He feels as though he's let his family down, and his wife actually really gets him to see that in this wonderful scene where he comes home and he hasn't even slept. And, she really brings him back to himself and what he can't see about himself. He even admired the fact that Paul Douglas, in a certain scene, was really rough with someone who ran a restaurant. This guy's wife died, again, because it spread. And he's really rough with the husband. I mean, in one way you feel bad for the husband because his wife just died, but the police and Richard Widmark know that guy must know where the criminals are because the criminals were in the restaurant. And he's really rough with the guy and gets the information, whereas Richard Widmark feels as though he should have been the one to do it. And he even remarks to his wife, I'm not half the man he is. So it's interesting how, even though him and Paul Douglas are not working very well together, there was a mutual respect and admiration. You do see Paul Douglas begin to come around in the film to the severity of this and his commitment to figuring it out, and him and Richard Widmark begin to back each other up and defend themselves. And of course, in the end, you see they were really on the same page as they finally locate, Zero Mostel and Jack Palance on this really wonderful chase towards the end. But I was just amazed at how, I was like, wow, because I saw this film in 2009 for the first time in a movie theater here in Toronto. It played at the Cinematheque, where they play a lot of old films. And I remember liking it. The only release scene I could remember is when they catch up to Jack Palance and he's trying to get one of the guys who clearly is sick. He's trying to run away with him because, again, he believes that this guy must know that the guy they killed off the top brought something into the country. So he's trying to find out what happened, and he's literally dragging out his body as the guy's nearly dead, and throws his body off the staircase onto the floor. And Jack Palance, his character is ruthless, and you see that he has a kindness to him because he's certain people were giving him information throughout the film, and he's charming, and he gives the guy a few dollars, and he's like this charming criminal. I mean, he only uses real force if he has to, but he's terrifying at the same time. I mean, just the look on his face is he's one of not someone you really want to mess with. But that was one scene I remembered, but I couldn't really remember much else, and I was just shocked at how relevant this film is, and how you see people not taking it seriously and then others taking it seriously. And just like we see with the current pandemic, a lot of people take it seriously, and then a lot of people don't take it seriously, or they think it's a conspiracy, and this and that, and stuff like that. And this film really shows that in terms of the behavior as people begin to learn about it, how they don't believe it or they just want to get on with their life. And there's a point where they find the boat that this man who was carrying this plague was on. They find, and Richard Widmark is talking to the captain, and actually he's the most aggressive guy, and he was trying to explain to him, this guy was on this boat. A lot of these men might be carrying this disease, and therefore, everyone's going to die. We're going to have to, vaccinate everybody. And he's really shoving Widmark, and he just wants to get on with his job. I mean, he could literally care less until finally they find that one of the cooks on board has a fever. It's like someone has to drop dead or get really sick for you to believe it first. I just thought that was wow. I mean, 72 years earlier, it's those very similar attitudes, both in support of trying to do the right thing, so making sure that the disease doesn't spread, to save the city, to save the country, and then other people who could care less or don't believe it or are cynical. And I just thought, wow, a lot of that behavior is in this. But it's a wonderful film. It's very plot heavy. But even though it has some really interesting relationships, as I said, between Paul Douglas and Richard Widmark, particularly Barbara Bel Geddes and Richard Widmark, and again, Jack Palance and Zero Mostel. It's interesting to see Elia Kazan direct a film like this. This was one of his first feature films. Another noir he did was Boomerang, and that is also this and Boomerang are both based on true stories, and it has a real documentary feel to it. It's sort of neorealism meets film noir. We saw in Europe and Italy films like Bicycle Thieves, Umberto D, using this very documentary, guerrilla style filmmaking, fly on the wall filmmaking, which was really new at that time. And you saw in this film, they shot on location in the streets. And he was also using non-actors because this was based on a true story. He was using people who were actually involved in this plague at the time. And it adds, the documentary style adds to it because it feels like it is a true story. So I thought it was a perfect way to tell that story, almost like one big newsreel that everyone at the end of the film is now hearing about in the radio or in the newspaper. And we're fortunate to see it in this melodramatic, crime drama. Where does the noir fit in? Because that doesn't really sound like noir. I think for me, certainly the murder off the top when Jack Palance kills the man carrying the plague and everyone is first stalking him and Zero Mostel and the other guy and jumping on him, the darkness, the shadows, the use of shooting at night. Obviously, a lot of film noirs were also shot. Documentary styles is a part of noir, but it's obviously mostly from the German expressionism with its use of shadow and light. And he has that, and then he also has this neorealistic look, as I described. But in terms of the themes of the film, I would say certainly the cynicism is a big part of film noir. Just people who are purely negative, and this film just reeks of cynicism, but then turns in an optimistic. We certainly don't have any femme fatales. We certainly don't have anyone who's a doomed protagonist. I suppose the only doomed people are Zero Mostel and Jack Palance, because that either they're going to get arrested or they're going to die from this plague. And they don't know it, but we know it. But it certainly has noir. I think because of the nature of the way it was shot, the nature of the feelings and the behavior and the cynicism and elements of a doomed protagonist, it certainly feels like a crime drama. Of course, it certainly is and feels noir to me. I'm curious if you feel it is a noir or not. Please comment below. I would love to hear what you think. Also, Kazan, really interesting because he shoots. One thing I noticed is he hardly was cutting. If you watch the film, it's not that the shots are just static, but he's just really following the action. And, some people might say, well, that's just hitting record. No, because you still have to block everything really well. You have to light it really well. I mean, that's actually harder to not cut. Because everything has to work so well. There's a wonderful sequence when everyone is brought in to be questioned by the police, and Zero Mostel being one of the people, and the camera starts at the entrance of this police room, and there's so many people in the room, and the camera pans back from desk to desk to desk as different police officers are questioning different criminals. And, you have to have timed when all the background players to move. You have to time when the actors can start speaking once the camera goes to the next person and to the next person. And there are a couple of shots, cuts towards the end of the scene because the dialogue with Zero Mostel is a little longer, and we, the audience, know that he is one of the criminals, but the police do not know that. The only other scene where I noticed there were more cuts was when he's with his wife, Barbara Belguez, and she's talking to him about the fact that he doesn't feel important and he feels guilty because he feels he's not doing enough for the family. And she also talks about how she found out she was pregnant a few weeks before. And there he begins to cut more. He goes in for more close-ups. It's a more intimate feel. And I felt that was appropriate. But I think because the film moves so fast and it has this documentary feel, I think the fact that he chose to shoot and follow the action and blocking it and lighting it so well, I think it just feels so alive and so quick and like a run, like people just running. It's almost like there was no time to cut. There's no time to breathe in this film. I thought that was a wonderful way to do this story. The only plot hole I saw in this, and I don't think I would have caught it unless we had the COVID, the current pandemic that we're experiencing over the last 2 years. But even though they've caught the criminals at the end, I would have thought, doesn't everyone have to quarantine? Doesn't everyone have to self-isolate in the city? Because, you do see throughout the film that when they knew for sure that the criminals or the guy carrying disease was on, for example, the boat, and even all the officers at the beginning who were in contact with the body had to get a vaccine. Obviously, how would he have a vaccine for that particular disease? But, no one's going to question that at the time. Only now we can look at it and really understand the specifics of what's going to be required in order they have to create a vaccine first and things like that. But I would have thought, at the end, they do release it to the press and you hear off the radio, they just talk about what happened. I would have thought there would be some kind of note that everyone has to now self-isolate because those criminals were in restaurants, they were running around town. So it already has spread, even though they've located those guys who definitely are carrying it. And now can't run out of the country or anything, or run from the cops out of the country or through another city. It certainly spread. So I was thinking, why wasn't there a note that everyone now has to self-isolate for 10 days or something? But I really don't think anyone would have thought that unless you really are looking at it through the lens of COVID-19. Perhaps at the end in the radio, they should have said everyone now has to self-isolate for 10 days or 20 or something along those lines. So if you've seen this film, please let me know in the comment what you think about it. I would love to know. So you can see this on the Criterion channel. It is going to be leaving at the end of this month. Highly recommend it. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I also want to mention that I'm on Patreon. For those of you who don't know what Patreon is, it is an exclusive membership where I have bonus content that is based on polls that I send out at the beginning of every single month. So you get to vote on various options based on what you may want to see. And it's just a few dollars a month, and it really helps content creators like myself keep making free content on YouTube. So go to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head right here to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.